Welcome to the Green Nurse podcast, where we bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing. We're here to change the dialogue and stigma around what it means to feel good or be high, hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. You deserve to feel good. We all deserve to feel good. And here is a little video clip about what we do in the space as nurses. And then we're going to get started on this very, very exciting show.
Change the paradigm of healthcare.
The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I'm the founder of Holistic Caring. We're based here in California, and we do educational programs and case management for patients on how to use cannabis therapeutically as a medicine.
We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high, hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing.
As the founder of Holistic Caring, I basically oversee the whole ship, and what we're doing is progressive education.
Cannabis actually supports all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all the neurotransmitter signaling systems that give messages to tell our body to either do something or not do something. Because the plant was prohibited, it prevented health professionals, doctors and nurses from learning about cannabis as medicine.
I want to change the paradigm of healthcare and us paving the way into a new vanguard of medicine.
It's about education, it's about empowerment, it's about teaching people how to feel good, bridging the gap from what they're not getting from traditional medicine, utilizing different plant medicines, adaptogens, tips, tricks, hugs, and nugs of information to support and nourish the most important system in our body.
And it's a lot of soul work, a lot of love, a lot of discipline, and meditation. I'm using my life work as a testimony to others to learn how they can be their own hero and then go help heal the world.
And we are, as nurses, the game changers. Oh, there you go. Growing in health, growing in cannabis. My name is Sherry Mack, and I am the Vice President of Nursing and co-founder of Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse. I am a very passionate cannabis nurse, patient, advocate, activist, and a passionate podcaster here to change the paradigm of healthcare. Cannabis saved my life, and psychedelics got me living again. And boy, do we have a great show for you tonight.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Elizabeth Mack, and I'm the CEO of Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse. We believe in the power of psychedelics as one of the tools in the toolbox for healing, just like cannabinoids. Holistic Caring offers a new program called Introduction to Psychedelics as Medicine, and this course grants 6 CEUs for nurses. We also offer private coaching to patients who wish to explore psychedelics as a healing option, guiding them on their path to safe use. We also have a free monthly support group and integration session in our private network that meets the 4th Thursday of each month. So join us tomorrow, 11:30, November 30th at high noon, and we'll see you there in the network, and that is Pacific time.
Yep, absolutely. Very good. So really, really excited to have our guest on today. I'd like to introduce CJ Spotswood, also known as EntheoNurse. We're going to talk about what EntheoNurse means, who is a board-certified psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner with his own practice in Central Maine. CJ is a third-generation male nurse and has over 20 years of psychiatric nursing experience. CJ is the author of Microdosing Guidebook, a step-by-step manual to improve your physical and mental health through psychedelic medicine, published by Ulysses Press. In 2018, CJ has immersed himself in the study and instruction of psychedelics. He has shared his expertise nationally and internationally, including speaking at the American Psychiatric Nurses Association's National Conference on Psychedelics and Psychiatry. CJ actively participates in organizations such as Open Nurses, the Psychedelic Medicine Association, Reconsider.org, and the Psychedelics and Pain Association. And today we are lucky enough to have him on our show to share his compelling journey and wisdom with us. Welcome, CJ.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, it is really, really, really good to have you here today. You know, we all don't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to be a cannabis nurse. I'm going to be a psychedelic nurse. I'm going to start doing something that is different. There's usually a compelling story that leads us into the area of expertise that you're in today. And so our viewers are very, very interested in learning about you, CJ, and what brought you into the psychedelic space. So how'd you get started?
I kind of fell into this space and trying to navigate, where am I going to go and what am I going to do with this? Because it is such an interesting, novel way going about it. I guess to kind of start, yeah, I've been a psychiatric nurse for over 20 years. I graduated my high school with my LPN. I went on for my RN, kept kind of going back, and I ended up here in Maine, and decided it was time to go back to school. I ended up going to the University of Maine at Augusta to get my bachelor's in nursing. I already had a bachelor's in psych and a couple other things, but I was like, I need to kind of do something with this. And when I got into that space, I didn't realize when I applied, but it was a quote unquote different program. It's one of the, I believe it's now 15 or 16 accredited holistic schools of medicine for nursing. So my mentor, my teacher throughout school, you probably know Dr. Carrie Clark.
Yeah.
She's former cannabis nurse, president of the American Cannabis Nurse Association. So kind of like really looked at like the different ways of healthcare differently and how to kind of, provide that holistic whole care. It was different because the classes were like Reiki for nurses and yoga for nurses and all these really just absolutely amazing courses that never thought anything different about it. Um, so then I finished with school and I went back to start working on my psychiatric nurse practitioner because at that point I was like, I guess I I need to go in this direction. There's a draw here. And kind of the interesting thing is I had applied, I wanted to take the holistic, the cannabis nurse accredited course. My hospital wouldn't pay for it. They said that the program was too political. So I was like, okay, that's fine, whatever. I mean, we have 70% of patients who are using cannabis, but why do we need that? Whatever. Um, so started at the University of Southern Maine for my psych nurse practitioner. Around that time, I was working in my emergency department. I had a patient who came in, first psychotic break, in his late 50s, early 60s, couldn't figure out why. We did a full medical workup and for a head injury and heavy metals and no drug history, and couldn't figure out. About two days later, when he came out of it, he had disclosed that he'd been using penis envy mushrooms to help with his depression.
Wow.
Which then led to, what is this? Because I knew of the old research from the 50s and 60s. I knew about what mushrooms can do superficially, but never really dove in too deeply. So I started researching, the penis envy mushrooms, which then led me to wondering if the hospital's computer people were going to kind of come after me because why are you searching this? And that led me down the path of reading Hamilton Morris's work on Dr. Stephen Pollack and his research with psychedelics in the early 60s. Who, anyone that's interested in learning about him, he basically was trying to open a mushroom farm for holistic health. And he was a doctor. He was murdered. It's still unsolved to this day. So in Hamilton Morris wrote about it in Harper's Bazaar. It was a great article in there. So that ended up leading me into starting to do research on what is this? Because he made a great quote in there. In 10 years, I foresee psychedelic medicines are going to be used, specifically psilocybin, for numerous mental health and other considerations. and then he was murdered, and now, we're 30 years later and we're coming back to where he was. So at that time, it was also, the interesting part was it came out right before How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan came out.
Mhm.
So when his book came out, I of course was reading it at work, and everyone's like, "What is this? What is this about?" And they knew of his other work, so it was a great introduction for them. So I ended up from there, when I was in grad school, I had to do a project comparing some research, and I picked, why not doing psychedelics? Because I'm already kind of doing the research on this. It's very interesting, and having access to basically all of the library of information. I just started printing off all of the research I can. Like, at this point now, I have a shelf in my office that's like 5 feet of just all this paper I've just printed from all these years. And so I had to do a project for school, where I had to do an educational program for peers, so other doctors, other nurses, social workers, to pick a topic. And I picked about psychedelics. And I knew that my hospital, the providers in my office, my unit, were interested in psychedelics. They were open to the idea. They were, like, one of them was looking at using ibogaine for a patient in the 80s for opiate use disorder, and wanting to send a patient to Montreal. So in doing that, I had this hour-long presentation. I said, "What the hell? I'm going to enter it to the APNA's national conference." I had not been picked for a podium presentation, and lo and behold, I was picked, which was amazing. About 8 weeks or so before I went, they said, "By the way, we're going to put you into the pharmacology hours. Can you make sure that's heavy with the pharmacology to kind of cover that?" Which I was like, "Yeah, I can do that." But I didn't realize at the time, at these conferences, when they're the pharmacology hours, they're the most heavily attended.
Ah,
So so because as a advanced practice, I've got to do like 75 hours every 3 years, 25 of which are pharmacology, which are only given basically at conferences. So I go do this talk, and I'm standing up there, and I realize it's 400 or 500 people, standing room only, people sitting on the seats, and I'm sitting on the ground. I'm going, so this is what imposter syndrome feels like, because I'm literally in school. I'm not a provider. I'm not, I've got 20 years of experience, but not at this level. And the talk went amazing. It was about psychedelics. It was about the history of psychedelics in nursing and in healthcare. Um, and it was interesting because as I'm looking out onto the crowd, there's a group of people out there, 60, 70-year-old nurses who are like retired, and they're there. And as I'm talking, they're just going,
mhm.
because they know. And so I come off of the stage, and I had the Q&A, and the rest of the week, everyone was coming up to me at the conference going, "That was a great talk. I'm surprised. Like, I'm glad that you came. It was the best talk I've ever seen." I was at a farmer, art thing in the middle of the city, actually, where I bought some of this art sitting behind me. Um, and it was like midnight, and a group of nurses come up and go, "You're the mushroom nurse." And I went, "Yes, I am." And I kind of knew at this point that I'm onto something here. And my professor at the college, I never told them I was going to come to this talk. I was never told them they just knew I was there. So in doing that, they were like, "When you get back, we need to talk to you."
Mhm.
So when I got back, they came up and said, "Hey, great talk. Can you do it for the class?" I went, "Oh, you guys are embracing this. That's amazing."
Mhm.
Um, so the rest of my college career there, every semester, if I had a project, they're like, "You gonna do psychedelics?" So I had to do a project on like a type of therapy. So people doing CBT, DBT, all of this. They're like, "Are you gonna do psychedelic psychotherapy?" And I went, "I wasn't thinking about it, but I will." They're like, "No, we'd like you to, so we can learn about it." And that's where I just kind of fell into that full force. It
Mhm.
was the first time APNA had ever done a talk on psychedelics, which was really cool. Since then, I've presented again. One of my colleagues, friends, Andrew Penn, head of Open Nurses, he's presented as well with them. So it's kind of like opened that door to so much more I never would have expected.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
amazing. So what do you do now? So let's continue on that story.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
started So you fell into psychedelics because you wanted to learn about it, and then you
Yep.
you started presenting, and then they kept asking you to present, and you're creating presentations. So then what happens?
So then I'm trying, because I'm here in Maine. I'm like isolated from the rest of the world. It's like 22 degrees outside right now. It's why I've got my hat on. It's, and I'm just trying to figure out what is my place in this? What am I doing? Knowing that, you know, I can do presentations, I can talk to the psychiatric side, I can talk about the medical side. I mean, I'm perfectly fit here as a nurse to be able to do this. So I ended up getting a hold of some different organizations. I presented at like the Mount Tam Psilocybin Summit on worst case scenario. I can't remember the name of it. It was like worst case scenario with a psychedelic trip. Um, I ended up reaching out and did some work with Psychedelics Today for their navigating psychedelics. I took their course. I did some coursework and some education with them. I ended up doing some work with Psychedelic.support. I co-authored their 9-hour psilocybin course for CMEs, for healthcare providers. So all these projects just started coming in, and as I was doing it, I'm just like, this is
Tried it.
interesting. This is interesting. I don't know where I'm going with this. I have no idea, but it's fun. And it's something that's exciting. It's not really work per se. It's a passion project. So I ended up at one point here. I started working. I graduated. I started working for my hospital where I have I'm the psych provider within a family medicine. So out of 10, there's like 10 providers. I'm the only psychiatric. Everyone else are PCPs within the practice. I do have a therapist in my office, which is a godsend, honestly. Um, but yeah, so I had something different, and I'm started working here. And around that time, it was, well, actually my last semester of school, actually, someone reached out and said, "Hey, I've got a friend who's working on a microdosing course. I know you're doing this. You're straddling the line between medical and psychiatric and stuff. Would you meet with them and kind of talk about it?" I said, I'll see what what it is." So I was talking to my now friend Tara Lee Weathers, and in talking with her, she was like, "I'm doing this course. I'm doing microdosing coaching. I'm a life coach. I'm not a therapist. I'm not any of this. And I'm getting inundated with these questions about drug on drug interactions, medical conditions. I'm over my head. Would you be willing to kind of jump into this project with me?" And I was like, at first I was reticent, I guess, because it was like everything I had read about microdosing, superficially was placebo effect, placebo effect, placebo effect. So I was like, give me a couple weeks here. I want to kind of see. I want to kind of dig into this because I'm not going to back something I don't believe in.
Mhm.
So I really got into working with Jim Fadiman's work and reading all of his stuff. I got into reading once again from a different lens some of the original research from the 50s and 60s. And in doing that, I was seeing, we're finding out what's a threshold dose. So we see that there's a physical change going on. They were using as a placebo, but they found this placebo threshold dose. So obviously there's something going on. And I'm going, with this research, maybe they don't know what they're looking for, and they're using this as a number and trying to go from there. And in doing that, I was like, there's something here. I believe in this. So I was like, "Yeah, count me on board. I'm doing this." So in that, we started working on the project, and in doing so, it was like, here's what I want to do. We're gonna make sure our time is valid. We're making sure our time is not a waste of time. I was like, I'm gonna put together this little pamphlet. So in this pamphlet, I ended up working on basically, you know, superficial. Here's how to go about microdosing. Here's all the stuff. So that way, when we met, it would be specific questions for people where they're at. So in their first meeting, I had said to everyone, I'm not your psychiatric provider. I'm not your clinician. And I'm not even graduated school yet when I started working on this. I'm in my last year of grad school. So I said, but take this information, print it off, bring it to your provider, let them know. They can go look at the research that I'm citing. They can help you to be your provider to make sure. And that's when that little light bulb hit over my head and was like, I'm onto something here. This is bigger than what I was even setting out to do. And this is also the height of COVID. So I started getting a hold of some different publishing firms and kind of like shopping around this idea. And I had a couple that were very interested. I had a couple that were like, we want more of a novel type situation. Um, and finally, I landed on one that was like, we love it, but we're printing 3 years out. I'm guessing you don't want to wait that long. I was like, absolutely not. But if I can't find anything, and that's when I end up getting a hold of Ulysses Press, who they've published on my psilocybin companion by Michelle Janikian, who I talked to her, and they loved the idea. They wanted to go with it. So like the setup of my book is like 3 parts. So it's like for the person that knows nothing about microdosing, how to go about it, how to find your dose, all of that kind of fun stuff. The second section of the book is for healthcare providers specifically, where I'm talking about what it is, how to have these conversations with their clients or their patients that are looking to do it, kind of a little bit heavier with the drug on drug interactions, specific mental health and physical conditions. And then the third part is a 6-week journey, kind of looking at the biopsychosocial model and where the person is in the world, and kind of like looking at like almost like a light psychotherapy type of piece. And I think that last section could be beneficial for anyone, not even just microdosing, because it really looks at where are you now? What is your surroundings? Who are you looking at working with and talking with in your diet, and how to kind of get you to the next step. So it kind of like is thinking blocks. With my publisher, when I shopped the book with them, they loved the idea. They said, we want to cut down it's long. So I wrote it basically as a dissertation. So I APA cited everything throughout the book. And they're like, we need to cut out some of the citations, and we found out we cut out like 60 pages just by taking out the so and so ate all in the year. Like it just cut it. And then they were talking about cutting out that second section for providers. And I was like, this stays or I can't do the book. This is what sets this apart from everyone else. Because this is the book I would want if my patient was doing this to come to it. So they're like, if you can make it fit, let's go with it. And in doing that, I cited things more heavily in that second section. It was the interesting part was where I cited everything. They were like, you're the healthcare professional. They're coming to you. You don't need to prove what you're doing. And I was like, wow, this is not what I was expecting. This is the academic world was not what I was expecting. So yeah, so I got the book out. I ended up the way that the world works. My first patient I ever saw as a new provider, like my no preceptor, patient number 1, psych eval, go in to meet with them, 60-some-year-old woman. And I was like, what brings you in, this and that? And she goes, can I ask you a question before we get going too far? I was like, yeah, what is it? She goes, do you know anything about microdosing? And I was like, I do actually. What do you know? So she started talking about what she knew and things like that. And I was like, she goes, so what do you know? I was like, I actually wrote a book on it. She goes, you've got to be effing kidding me. I said, no. She goes, prove it. Get your phone out and go on Amazon and you can search my name. And she was like, wow, this is like unbelievable. What is the chances of coming and having this? And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, what's the chances of my first patient ever having this as like coming in and asking me? So of course the book wasn't printed yet. It was still, we were in the editing process. So I wrote that little story into the book and stuff. And we haven't discussed it. So I don't know if she knows it was her or not, but it was kind of a neat little like, oh my God, I'm just in the right journey. Cause a lot of times in my work that I've had, when I went to this national conference, when I went and started doing some of this stuff, I'm going, am I committing career suicide? Like here I am going in front of I thought maybe 100, 200 nurses, not 600, and kind of talking about the pro use of these drugs. And they were like, yeah, this is it. And I'm going, I guess this is once again another spot where I'm right in the world. This is where I need to be. This is how it's supposed to go. It was awesome. And the ironic part of it, my hospital actually that did not want me to that didn't want to pay for my cannabis nurse certification, they paid for my trip and no problem. They're like, yeah, we'll have you go down. We'll have you go to the talk. We'll use your continuing ed education. I'm going. So I can't talk about cannabis, but I can talk about LSD, psilocybin. Da, 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 da. Okay, I'll just
That's
follow your lead on that. So
that's
Just
amazing.
tells you where the
yeah,
stigma is.
Yeah, it tells you
Yeah.
where
it
the
really
stigma still
does.
lies, for
Oh,
sure.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But for our new viewers, because there's a lot of people that are tuning in for the first time, we're talking about psychedelics and we were talking about microdosing, and CJ has written a book on microdosing. And so for the new viewers, the people that are out there that are new, that are hearing all these buzzwords, what is microdosing?
So technically, microdosing would be the taking 1/20th to 1/10 of a full dose of psychedelics for personal improvement. Um, so when we look at that, what is personal improvement? It might be to help with a physical or mental health condition. It might be to have personal growth. Or the last reason is basically like to come off of other drugs or medications. So really, any use that it falls into one of those three categories. Um, my book is catered specifically. It's talking about the serotonergic classic psychedelics, the ones that affect the serotonin 2A receptor. So specifically, it's written toward LSD and psilocybin. Some of the work with my book is there's just a dearth of information. So because they're so similar in structure in many ways, it's sometimes had to extrapolate some ideas from one or the other because there isn't a lot of research that was done, drug on drug interactions, things like that in laboratory, especially when it comes to microdosing. We're looking at, there's no money in it. It's gotten better since my book came out. There's a couple of researchers that are working, like Connor Murray, but I believe, I can't remember where he's at right now, looking at like EEG waves and microdosing, things like that. But really, there's not a lot of research that's done on it. So I really look at those. I do know some people who have had some experience microdosing ibogaine. Um, I've heard of some people doing it with ayahuasca. I'm not really talking about those because those change the drug on drug interactions, things like that. I've actually had a conversation with uh, some high level person, corporate, for one of these major organizations about the potential use of MDMA microdosing, and think that might be an interesting topic. But my book is basically focused on those. So if someone was looking at amounts for microdosing, so 1/20th to 1/10 of a full dose of psilocybin is about 3.5 grams. So that we're looking at is like zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.4 grams of dried mushrooms. Um, when we look at LSD, kind of the idea is 1/20th to 1/10 of a square for of LSD, which would be about 10 mics or so. But if we was kind of actually interested in doing that, I reached out to James Fadiman, the author of the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. There he is.
You got to
Yep.
have this book.
So when we were talking about microdosing, he ended up putting it in his book and talked about it. It's a brief chapter. I think it's like 6 pages long, briefly mentioning it. And then he had so many people reaching out and started doing research on it and everything. Just fascinating work. But before I ended up like publishing my book, before I even like saw to publish, I reached out to him and I'm like, just seeing if I was like, I don't want to step on any toes if you have anything coming with this, if you're not. And he's like, no, you have my blessing. I don't have a problem with it. I was like, can you take a look and see if there's anything in here that you might, add or like worry about? And he emailed me back a couple days later. He goes, I haven't read your whole book. I read quite a bit. I love it. It was fascinating. He goes, I've got one concern for you. And I was like, okay. He goes, when you said 1/10 to, when you said 10 to 20 mics of LSD, I know there's a lot of people out there that might kind of go with that. From my opinion and my research, which is based on tens of thousands of reports, I usually tell people between 7 and 13, Mike. So I was like, okay, well, thank you. I mean, if that's the case, I was like, can I quote you? He goes, oh, absolutely, please do. So,
Oh, that's great.
he's like, I loved your book, and it was I hope it comes out well, because it was very early publishing, and I've had some great conversations with Jim, and he's just a gracious, wonderful human being. Very thankful for his work.
Yeah,
Mm.
perfect. I have a burning question. So you're working as a provider off the hospital. So you're getting
Yeah.
patients and you have a practice and that sort of thing. So are you seeing patients using psychedelics, and are you documenting those and working with them side by side in the treatment plan with the other psychotropics? And then of course let's talk about some of those interactions that we might want to
Yeah.
uncover as well.
Wonderful, wonderful question. I get asked this question all the time. And what I really like about it is it's always my answer's always changing, partially because of my own comfort level, and also partially because of the acceptance of talking about these substances. So um part of in doing this, I've also returned back to school after I finished graduating. I went to the CIIS, the California Integral Institute, uh, for their certificate in psychedelic therapies and research. And in doing that, it's a year-long certificate program. And as a result, my I don't want to say my hospital. I don't want to give a huge blank, but so my former supervisor, who is also my preceptor in school, she knew of my work. She knew of my book, and she reached out and she goes, "I've got a patient here that I've been seeing who is interested in microdosing. Would you be willing to do a one-time consult with them? They'll stay as my patient and just kind of talk about it and kind of give some guidance to this." Now I was like, absolutely, please do. And prior to that, like, I had patients that were asking me, and I was kind of navigating where am I going to go, and I was having these conversations, and how do I cover myself, where do I kind of go, and everything, and being very okay. I'm going to take off this hat and I'm putting this hat on, and let's have these conversations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when my preceptor and my mentor kind of gave me and asked me if I'd be willing to do it, I had the conversation in that, and just because of my advanced education in with the CIS and having the certificate, they felt the comfort here and my experience here. I can give this unique ability, this unique perspective. So I met with her patient and kind of looked at the drug on drug interactions, and kind of went, here's where we can go. Here's your options. Here's where you're at. Um, and that's where I was kind of torn. How do I even how do I document this or not? Where do I
Mhm.
go? And kind of part of me was, if I do, what does that look like long term? And then the other side is, if I don't, what kind of a disservice am I doing by not having this and normalizing these conversations?
Mhm.
Which went back to like the like part of like the second part of my book. I said to providers, you know, patients are coming to you to have these conversations, and if they are coming to have these conversations with you, they're trusting that you know something, and you might be able to go here. So if you don't feel comfortable having these conversations, that's fine. Find someone that are open to it, because if you give that barrier, or saying you're not for it, you're causing a rift in the rapport, and you're never going to be able to build that back, because you start telling them, back to the, this is your brain on drugs in the frying pan. Then, I think that with the information that's out there, people know enough that they're going to go, this provider's full of crap, and I'm not going to believe anything they're really saying. So, I ended up kind of like putting this little template together for patients, and it's grown now to a point where, as I've talked about this in different presentations and other places, I've kind of got it down, because more people have asked me this, and it's like, by normalizing. So by basically my template that I have with it is, I say the patient came to me asking me about psychedelic substances. I did not recommend that to them. Um, Nor am I giving them, you know, condoning its use. That I'm coming from a harm reduction / risk reduction. I like using like the risk reduction, because they're not inherently harmful, but there are risks. So
Mhm.
softening that, I kind of put in my little blurb a little bit about what harm reduction is, in case people don't understand it, to kind of cover themselves. And then I kind of talk about, the barriers of um, or the limitations for modern medicine, modern pharmacology. I mentioned a little bit about the research that's happening out there and how this is changing a little bit. And then I go into a little bit of, and for this patient, here's a potential drug-on-drug interaction or not, and here's the recommendations for it. And then kind of the end of that is, I am not, I don't know what the patient is using, nor do I know, I'm encouraging them to do safe drug testing, or if they're growing their own mushrooms, they know what they are, things like that. But kind of that risk reduction aspect, but kind of putting all out there, like the patient is out there choosing to do this, and this is where they're going with it. But I think about, when I kind of was trying to figure this out, I think about, what's the difference between, as a nurse, having a conversation about smoking reduction, alcohol cessation or moderation, um, opioid use, overdose, Narcan, needle exchanges? What's the difference between that and mushrooms? What's the difference between, what is it? So if we can have that as being an improvement, why are we not having this normalized? So after I had that consult, my provider asked me if I wanted to do another one. So now I do a couple every so often. I probably do less of that than patients who come in and ask me. But surprisingly, because I'm very open about what I do, in the social network and everything, but as a local, people don't know. So I have a lot of patients who come in, and once again, like my first patient, do you know anything about psychedelics? Can you tell? And I'm like, actually, I do. And well, usually if it's a patient that's not mine or wasn't expecting, I'll tell them, I don't have time for this 30-minute med management appointment to have this conversation. Let's schedule you for a 60-minute appointment for the next time, and bring some questions, and you have my complete attention, but I would be doing a disservice at this time. And we come back, and it's amazing.
Yeah. So for the new viewers, one of the questions in the interview, we do talk about microdosing. You mentioned risks, so I want to mention that. What are some of the risks, and what are some patient populations that should not be exploring psychedelics?
So the big risk, I think, I'll just say it.
Obviously.
I'll What's
Legal.
that?
Reality.
It's the legality. I mean, that's the number one, is the legality. I mean, I have, without going into too much detail for herself, I testified for a nurse who was caught with microdosing psilocybin, and it was not pretty, and that whole trouble that she had with it. So legality is the big part of it, which then also, I think that kind of goes into where we as nurses need to kind of be more vocal and open with, the decrim movement, and having this access that's there. Um, so that's kind of the big one, is the legal part. The other, when it comes to microdosing, there's not any real major risks per se, especially if someone starts with the old adage, start low, go slow, and kind of find what their dosage is. And then maybe redosing, refiguring out when they have a different batch or a different supply of what they've got. Um, kind of the So one of the other major hypothetical, I'll say hypothetical side effects, is there's a potential for um, cardiomyopathy that's questionable because of the stimulation of the serotonin 2B receptor. Have not seen anyone. I have not even read any case studies of this actually happening at this point. Um, but it's kind of based on, because of it does have some of that effect on that 2B receptor. And if it's chronically hitting it from microdosing, hitting it every couple of days, if hypothetically could. Um, it's based on some other medications that have come out that have been pulled. Like, if anyone remembers the fen from the early 90s, one of the two fens that are in there had the same thing, what was causing it. So if someone, it is easily picked up if someone did have from like an echocardiogram, things like that. With that, there's a lot of people, I feel, that were using full dose psychedelics for a long time, such as people who went on tour with the Dead. None of these people are having these issues. So I warn, I mention it. There's some great research. Ben Malcolm and Kalen Thompson. He writes about it. And I've been in good conversations with them. I think it's good to heed to the warning. I'd love to see. I don't want to say I'd love to see someone actually get it, but I'd love to see some more being done and being known. And that's where if more research can be done, we can know more about this.
What about a psychosis? And then let's go to a big dose.
Right.
Do you have anybody that that wants that heroic dose, 3.5 grams or 5? And you say, whoa, I don't think that's a good idea.
So I when it comes to psychosis, I actually just read a great paper the other day. I think it was a pre-publication talking about the use of psilocybin or psychedelics for individuals with a history of psychosis, and looking at the the number of people that have this that also have a co-occurring high ACEs, adverse childhood effect. And if we're using these for healing, how much of the trauma could be healed from it, and kind of what the authors in that paper, I wish I could remember which one it was at the time. But what they talk about is maybe by having this as something inside of a inpatient facility, or more than just an outpatient monitoring, would that be sufficient? And I think that might be a good idea. I think that would be good for that. We've seen where people that have a history of psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar 1 have had extended psychedelic journeys, more difficult, things like that. But as we're starting to see more research being done, the researchers are pushing the guidelines out a little bit and kind of starting to get some people with bipolar, things like that. And for me, I really feel with someone with bipolar, either especially with like microdosing, it might be one of the most beneficial properties. It might be the most dangerous, or with having a potential adverse effect. And also realizing that research is done, with often healthy normals, because we don't want to have these effects. So really, it's for lack of a better term, sanitized who they're choosing to be in the research. But when it comes to bipolar depression, it is notoriously difficult to treat and to get, because there's such a hesitancy. I know with my practice, even treating someone with serotonergic antidepressants, you can induce manic episodes with it. So kind of my recommendation for people is, if they're choosing to do it, and I'm not recommending it, but people do everything on their own as it is, have a reliable friend with you when you're microdosing to kind of monitor your mood. So if you start seeing like mood elevations to being like hypomanic, manic, things like that, they can kind of catch it a little bit and kind of go, hey, mood's going a little bit high, because we're not the best judge of character, especially if someone who's depressed and all of a sudden they're no longer depressed, and where's that line there? So I think that's
You
having
want
a
to
buddy
take that
system.
you want to take that as a victory, but
Right.
you need somebody that's really lockstep with that person, so that they can really see the nuances, right?
Absolutely.
Because mania is a hard thing, and you don't want to trigger that, because there's all kinds of risks for that. But the depression, and just how psychedelics have the ability to wash the brain is a risk that a lot of people want to take. And I'm with you on the inpatient, where you can really try it in a very, very safe, contained setting.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going in and and doing an outpatient, which is where it's easier and less expensive to do, 8 hours in, that's great. But if you can have it so someone can have this um, life-changing experience, really, even if the outcomes is mood improvement for a year for someone from being depressed, I mean, that's give them a fresh breath of light and life in them, and new wind in their sails. So I mean, that's where I think that we can. I mean, then comes the accessibility and the issues there. But if we can have this so more people can have it as an option, I think it'd be hugely beneficial for it.
Yep. And the other thing too, I just want to mention about psychedelics and microdosing as well, is not only just the microdosing, that the dose is smaller than a macro dose, but also not taking it every day. So what we're seeing, very similar to the green rush with cannabis, at the psychedelic rush, is people that are microdosing, they're taking, the subperceptual doses, but they're taking it every single day and not giving it a break. So I would love for you to talk on the importance of microdosing days on, days off, and why we do that.
So there's basically two schools of thought when it comes to microdosing. Like I said before, in talking with James Fadiman, he has what's called the Fadiman protocol, where
Mhm.
it's day one you take, the day two you don't take. It might not be as great of a day, but it still has a little bit of a honeymoon period. Day three you don't take. It might be the worst out of the days because it's wearing off, and then you redose on the fourth day. And then by doing that, it gives the body, you don't build a tolerance, but at the same time, I feel you can build a relationship with the medicine and kind of go, was this enough? Was it not? Do I need to go a little higher? Do I need to go a little lower? Am I feeling more jittery? Because when we look at um, microdosing, a lot of the side effects that people might have, such as nausea, sleeplessness, anxiety, things like that, it's very dose dependent.
Mhm.
So, if by someone gets up to a higher dose and it's causing more anxiety or more problems, next time go back down and see where you're at there, and kind of building that relationship with the medicine, which is completely different than like standard pharmacological methods of doing it. And Jim had said, it wasn't when he kind of came up with it, it wasn't because of like it just made it wasn't because this is what I want to do or whatever. It was more of a it helps make a better research. You can kind of like know what days are good, bad, nothing, and kind of come up with it.
Well, and it's
Right?
also teaching people to respect the medicine, but also to respect their bodies, right? What are we
Absolutely.
doing? We're teaching people agency. We're teaching people that they have a very smart body that wants to heal, but you have to listen to it and pay attention to
Well,
it.
yeah, and you have to tune in, and
Yeah.
so the people not taking a break, they just want that drug, so they don't have to feel, and they think it's going to repair them magically, right? And
But as we know, the healing is in the feeling. You got to feel all
That's
the
it.
feels.
You do good, bad, otherwise. You have to feel it, and I think that with you know, kind of the idea is I talk about the book is doing like a 6-week journey of microdosing to figure out and build that relationship. Take a month off, 2 months off, and then go back to it, whatever. But in that time, a lot of people I see both in my practice that have come in, or people I've talked to outside from my book and stuff, what they do is they build a relationship with it to the point where they might do it once a week, once every 2 weeks, whenever they feel they need it, or having a way can kind of improve
Intuitive.
their mood, or go out for a hike and be reconnected, closer connection with nature, which is actually where when we start looking at having that, being around that and the surrounding and being connected to it can be so healing, and that force bathing of it. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, Hoffman, um who first developed LSD, he in one of his interviews he talked about LSD should only be enjoyed in nature, and that's where the best to be, and just that connection with their mind, body, spirit out with the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Stamets too, right?
Yeah.
Like with the
And
mushrooms
yep,
and yeah. So the whole
exactly.
thing. So I want to pivot to nursing, right? We're
Yeah.
all nurses here. So
Yep.
what is nursing's role, and how is this going to break through? What do you foresee in our near future?
Oh. Well, I have to say, being a nurse, obviously, I'm biased to this.
Mm.
Um, part of my talks I've been doing is I have done quite a bit of research on nursing in psychedelia. There's a great paper by Laura Berg. It was in the MAPS Bulletin, 1994. She did a 2-part interview where so Laura Berg was a nurse who worked with Rick Strassman for the first DMT study,
Mhm.
first study with psychedelics in 1990 since the 70s. And she was referred to herself as being a, quote, flight nurse, where she helped the person go on their trip and stayed with them on their journey, making sure that they were safe. Um, she talks about in her paper, she talked about some different research that was done with nursing within psychedelia. Um, Great
K
paper, awesome. And then of course there's
K Parlay.
Kay,
Yes.
who is she is 99 or 100 now. She's still alive. Actually,
Yeah.
I was talking with Andrew Penn the other week, and they're actually planning on going out to Saskatchewan to meet with her before here this spring. So
Share with our viewers who Kay Parlay is.
so Carly, so Kay is a nurse. She was at the hospital they referred to as the Mental, and it was the hospital that they did LSD studies for alcohol use. In during that time, what was interesting about Kay is her grandfather and her father were both had bipolar. She ended up going out to Toronto to become a radio anchor, I believe is what it was. And she had her first psychotic break, and she ended up in the hospital where both her father and grandfather were. When she got doing better, she actually got released. She went back and became a nurse and worked at the same hospital that she was once at. And she was working with individuals for their LSD studies. Her book I've got here, it's a fantastic read. There's only like one chapter in there about the psychedelics work, but during that time she talks about having a love interest with who is it? Oh, I can't think of his name now, and it's embarrassing. But during that time, she had also started talking about what it's like being a patient on the wards and kind of the life of being a psychiatric nurse. It's a lovely, lovely book. It's just fascinating. And if there's a video, it's on YouTube with her interview, and she's just, old grandma talking with these old stories. And she's just so excited. Just beautiful lady. So yeah, love that.
I didn't know about that book. I'm going to get that book. I spent my first 8 years in Locke psychiatric mental health. So I know those units, and I know the desperation. With the alcohol, they gave them a 3-day detox or so before the psychedelics. They were washed out of the alcohol, correct?
They were washed out of the alcohol. And then they were looking at, in doing that, to basically, induce this change with the psychedelic experience, and kind of going in that process, having a transformative experience.
Yeah.
So it was really, and a couple of things that she said in here was, you can, when a nurse because the other part that's interesting is in the early studies, the nurses that were working with it would have their own psychedelic experience. So with LSD and sometimes with the patients and doing it all together. And her quote was, "You can tell when a nurse has had their LSD experience because they just work a little bit better. They just have a better rapport with their patients." And it's just like, so it's just like these little glimmers of hope where you're reading it and going, "Oh my God, this is amazing." So yeah, it's really a fun book. It's lovely. So yeah, there's a lot of research. I've actually got a manuscript I'm working on getting out at some point, talking about the history of psychedelics and nursing, so what we're seeing now, I think, part of my CIIS program was I've got the beginning MAPS training for MDMA once legal, and to get the next step, we have to have supervision hours and things like that. There's a bottleneck for providers, and when we start seeing these becoming legal and opened up out there, who's going to be able to do this work? And I dare say nursing is, as I'm saying, here's my bias, best fit for it, because we have the medical background, we have the experience. I don't think that there's that much of a difference, sitting with someone who's under the influence of psilocybin or MDMA, than working with a acutely psychotic patient, or a patient that might have delirium, things like that. You're working these altered mental states. The only difference is we're inducing it with a substance instead of it being produced. So that great
producing it with a substance to help them heal, to actually facilitate change and to heal, as opposed to just watching them flounder and suffer.
Absolutely.
And as opposed to most nursing practice, we really kind of want nurses to have tested positive for this a few times, because you really do have to have that experience, that experiential knowledge to sit with somebody does help, because it puts everything into context.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been active with open nurses, and we end up pulling because there's the protocols were coming out. The FDA is kind of looking at where are we going to go, what's it going to look like, and kind of like in that, one of the arguments kind of that we came up was they wanted to have people that had a bachelor's in nursing with at least 2 years of of inpatient mental health experience for the assistant. Not the lead person need to have an advanced practice degree. Um, so kind of the argument here is if you're going to put nursing needing to have a 2 years of mental health, that's going to take out some of the great people that are working here, like Annie Mithofer, who done the map. She literally wrote the MDMA protocols for it with her husband, Mike. And in doing that, she wouldn't even be able to be doing this because she doesn't have the 2 years. Like,
Mm.
Right.
yeah, and that's just one example of many. So, I think if you're working in palliative care, emergency departments, ICU, you're working with enough people with altered mental status that
Yes.
it's very similar. You're going to figure it out. Is the path exactly the same? No, but you're going to know it once you start walking it,
Yeah.
because it's not what it's how you're doing. It's that art of nursing that comes out.
Yeah. But we do still have to be protected. You had a question. How do nurses stay protected in exploring this field?
Yes.
So that was a question. So part of like I've had that trying to figure out with. I talked to some of the nurses out in Oregon as they've tried to kind of figure out, because now it's legal. How do they go about this? And how do they have those protections? How are they protected with like malpractice insurance? How are they looking at that? And kind of like I do believe that it is important to have that experiential part in there. I mean, you know, if we think of a similar, I could go out hunting with a main guide that you hire them to go out. If they're going to go out and I'm going to go out with them for whatever, I want them to kind of have been out there in the woods before, not
Yeah.
just kind of reading it from a book. I mean,
Mhm.
it's night and
Exactly.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's that appreciation to it when you know what these kind of spaces are at mentally. You can kind of know, at least have an idea of where you're at. So I
Mhm.
think about for myself, like one of the questions I had when I wrote the book is, do I bring this out in my real name? Okay, I'm going to, because and am I committing career suicide? Well, I think I need to, because I need to come out of the psychedelic closet a little bit to normalize this. And then
Mm.
part of it was do I talk about do I talk about experiences I may have had, which then leans to building like a reputable source of this, or do I not, because then it like makes so people think I'm not a reputable source. And that's kind of like some of the questions that other people have had. And I finally came to, I need to come out of that psychedelics closet to normalize this conversation, to decrease that stigma so people feel comfortable with it. So, and I found in my CIIS program, in talking to other people in my program, because I was telling them about how I'm doing this above ground, I'm doing this openly, and in doing that, they live in other parts of the country, and they're like, I could never do that. It would be a blowback. So it's really a question of, where are
Mm.
you feeling comfortable with this? How is that looking for yourself um, with that? Um, so in my book, I ended up talking about my a journey that I went on, and kind of found that's where I came about with the name of the EntheoNurse, and having to
That's
do with that.
that's
Uh,
great. And this is
yeah,
because
You,
we're winding down on the hour.
yeah. So you came up with EntheoNurse on a journey.
yeah. I was coming out. Quick story, I decided as I was preparing for one of my conferences, I was like, I need to find something. I need some inspiration, or kind of like, am I missing something here? And I've got an island that's here by me. I don't recommend people doing this on their own, but once again, so the island's about 5 miles long. I end up going and canoed out there. I ate some mushrooms that may not have been psilocybin. I don't know, but about 20 minutes later, I do believe I could confirm. I think that they were psilocybin.
Mhm.
Um, and in that journey, walking across the island, there's just trails kind of going back and forth, knowing that I can't get lost on there and no one else is out there. And by the last like tenth of a mile or so, or quarter mile, I was kind of coming out, and that's when it kind of hit me like, I'm on the right path. I'm doing what I need to be doing. Um, I need to continue this. And I'm like, where do I go with this? And I kind of thought of, I've got this holistic background that there's nothing that fits. And then kind of like thinking of what is an entheogen? It's something that produces the healing inside. So that is with nurse, the nurse that's helping people heal from the inside.
EntheoNurse,
Yeah.
the nurse that is helping people heal from the
That's beautiful.
inside. That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Well done.
Amazing. Well done.
Thank you.
Good job. It has been amazing having you on the show. We've learned so much.
Can I give one quick plug? Because I did
Absolutely. And I want to give a plug as well.
one of the things, my above ground work I've been kind of doing is with a company called REMAP Therapeutics, where we've been looking at doing some psilocybin work. I did some work with an individual who, for her chronic pain, REMAP was looking at remapping people's mind and how they work. She went from a chronic pain of 6 out of 10 for the last 15 years and did a 3 psilocybin journey out in Colorado with my partner. And now we are 60 days out. Her pain is now chronic pain ranging between a 0 and a 0.5. I mean, absolutely. And no more symptoms of PTSD, all of that, just absolutely fascinating. So like, just by normalizing this, like, this is something I'm working on, with my partner, and just kind of like, Court Wing, who was actually one of the first NYU study participants for depression. So it's kind of one of these things where, I'm pulling my head out. I'm trying to come above board. I'm trying to figure out how to go about this with like my private practice a little bit more to kind of have it more accessible for people. So just kind of like, let's normalize these conversations.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this has been an amazing show. We do have a message from our sponsor. We have to give a big shout out to Bloom Hemp. Elizabeth.
Yeah, Bloom Hemp. So today's show is brought to you by Bloom Hemp. Bloom Hemp is women and nurse owned. It's a national CBD hemp supplier that is leading with quality, safety, value, and patient-centered care. Bloom Hemp products are USDA organic, CBD grown in the mountains of Colorado, tested for purity, potency, cannabinoid, and terpene profiles. Bloom Hemp is proud to offer a free nurse line. So call 970-404-HOPE or 4673 to answer questions about CBD and explain how and why it works in the body. Bloomhemp.com and enter the code GREENNURSE for 10% off plus free shipping.
All right. Very good. And I'm going to put a little comment in the comment section about Bloom Hemp.
Yeah. So yeah, and Bloom Hemp also, one more thing, has a psychedelic or emotional wellness bundle. It's kind of like the best products for your gut, your serotonin, your energy, your sleep, your calming, and your restoration with good hemp CBD capsules and that sort of thing. So check it out. It's already 20% off, so it's good to go.
Yep. And when we are working with psychedelics, microdosing, we need to make sure we take care of our endocannabinoid system. As a reminder, the endocannabinoid system is the largest neurotransmitter signaling system in our body. It regulates all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all the neurotransmitter signaling systems that give messages to tell our body to either do something or not do something. So when we're using psychedelics as medicine, we need to make sure that we take care of our endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, and a Facebook user wants the phone number again. So 970-404-HOPE 4673 is the nurse line phone number. And you can call that in USA business hours, and it's going to be answered by a nurse or a pharmacist.
There we go.
Yep.
All right. So this has been an amazing show. We look forward to having you on again, CJ. You are a wealth of knowledge.
In another couple of years, I want to talk about real case studies that we're actually able to really deep dive in. That would be fascinating.
I'm all for it. I've got some stuff already I'm working on for that as well. And, the other place I want to recommend people, anyone's looking at learning more about psychedelics and nursing, check out Open Nurses. It's the organization of psychedelic and entheogenic nurses. On there's a good little network for people to kind of learn more, see other people that are involved, and kind of find your people. We're out there. We're just not all out there.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us. And remember what it's all about. It is truly about living your best life and helping others do the same. We're going to end with one of my other favorite videos. We're here to educate and empower patients to make choices that are best for them. We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high. Hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I was cannabis agnostic for many, many years. And you know, the more research I did, the more I discovered that cannabis is this amazing medicine.
I was told that I had a 4-stage pancreatic cancer. The doctor really told me he couldn't do anything else. He gave me her name and she called me and she came to my house. She started to give me cannabis. My oncologist was puzzled because he couldn't find the cancer anymore.
All of the learning that we get comes from the Green Nurses Group, comes from their support, comes from their guidance. I trust everything that she says.
Simply meet people where they're at. The plant doesn't, stress to grow, so we don't stress to share it. We're healing people.
Cannabis has been used as a medicine for tens upon thousands of years. Here's the big message. Cannabis needs to be federally legal. We need to have laws that are the same across all 50 states that allow access to anyone and everyone who wants to utilize this powerful medicine.